Ladies and gentlemen, let's cut straight through the fluff. The world just witnessed a diplomatic exchange that will be replayed for years. Not because of a press release, not because of a staged handshake, but because of a sentence that summed up a century of changing power. Imagine this. The United States, once the unquestioned referee of global politics, suddenly finds itself on the receiving end of a blunt rebuke from New Delhi. Donald Trump, the man famous for steamrolling rivals with sharp words, finally met someone who doesn't flinch. Jaishankar didn't shout, didn't rant, he simply told Washington, in the language of sheer confidence, "Sit down, India is not playing your game." And that, right there, left America stunned. Because this wasn't the India of the 1990s, begging for trade concessions. This wasn't the India of the early 2000s, quietly playing second fiddle. This was a new India, unapologetic, self-assured, and absolutely unbothered by American threats. Now, some may call it arrogance, others may say it was disrespectful, but let's be honest. It was the truth wrapped in diplomacy's sharpest blade. For decades, US presidents, including Trump, believed they could twist arms with tariffs, sanctions, and threats. But this time, India didn't bow. It stood tall. It looked Washington square in the eye and said, "No, we will buy what we want. We will trade with whom we please. We will decide our future, not you." And isn't that exactly what leadership sounds like? That's why this moment shook America. Not because of insult, but because for the first time, they were forced to recognize India not as a follower, but as an equal, maybe even as a rival. Call it a clash of egos if you like, call it a power play, but the fact remains, the tables have turned. The world is no longer waiting for America's permission, and Jaishankar just reminded everyone, in one unforgettable moment, that India's seat at the table is permanent. When we use a phrase like "sit down, boy" in the political arena, it is not about an actual insult hurled across a conference table, nor is it a verbatim quote meant to be taken literally. Instead, it works as a metaphor, a vivid way to capture a shift in dynamics between two powerful players. For decades, the narrative around global power has been one where the United States stands tall, issuing commands, expecting others to comply. Washington has long acted like the teacher in the classroom, and much of the world, particularly developing nations, was expected to nod, obey, and play the role of quiet students. What makes this new phase striking is that India is no longer willing to accept that posture. The phrase captures the attitude, not a specific exchange, but a tone, a defiance, a refusal to bow to external pressure. When India's Foreign Minister Jaishankar pushes back against American demands or challenges Washington's assumptions, he does so in language that is carefully measured yet piercing. He does not need to raise his voice or resort to dramatics. His calm, sharp responses already communicate the same weight as if he had told someone to sit down. That is why audiences across the world interpret his words as carrying that energy. It is not about being disrespectful, but about asserting sovereignty with such clarity that even the world's most powerful leaders find themselves momentarily disarmed. The symbolic power of the phrase also lies in the generational shift it represents. For years, American presidents, including Trump, have believed that tariffs, sanctions, and strong-arm diplomacy could bend nations into submission. That assumption worked with some, but with India, the old formula suddenly collapsed. By standing its ground on issues like trade, oil, and security partnerships, India showed that it was not the student anymore. In metaphorical terms, telling someone to sit down signals that the roles have flipped. The one who used to give orders is now being reminded to wait, to listen, to recognize that the balance of power has changed. The brilliance of this language is that it dramatizes a real-world truth. India no longer needs validation, nor does it fear confrontation. It speaks as an equal, and in doing so, it rewrites the script of global diplomacy. India's growing confidence on the world stage is not a sudden burst of pride, but the outcome of decades of steady progress. What once was seen as a developing nation struggling with poverty and limited influence has now transformed into a rising power with the credibility to challenge even the strongest voices in global politics. This confidence is visible in multiple dimensions: the size of its economy, the strength of its democracy, the expansion of its military, and perhaps most importantly, the ability of its leaders to speak with authority and clarity in international forums. When Jaishankar, or any Indian official, stands firm against pressure from the United States or other Western nations, it is not arrogance but the natural expression of this newfound strength. Economically, India is now among the top global players, projected to become the world's third largest economy within this decade. That level of growth provides leverage. It gives India the confidence to pursue independent trade deals, resist unfair demands, and chart its own path. Militarily, India has built one of the most powerful defense forces in the world, with strategic partnerships across multiple continents. It is not dependent on a single power for security guarantees, and that independence feeds into a more assertive diplomatic voice. Confidence also comes from self-image. A nation that once was primarily defined by its challenges is now defined by its opportunities. India's booming technology sector, its leadership in space exploration, and its role in global supply chains show that it is not waiting for others to open doors. It is building its own. This is why American tariffs or threats no longer spark panic. Instead, they are met with calm resistance. India knows it can absorb pressure, adapt to challenges, and continue growing regardless of outside obstacles. The most striking sign of this confidence, however, is how India communicates with the world. Jaishankar's style embodies it perfectly: no begging, no fear, no hesitation. His replies to tough questions or criticisms are concise, sharp, and unapologetic. They carry the weight of a country that understands its value. When India speaks today, it does so as a nation that knows the world cannot move forward on major issues, whether climate change, trade, or security, without its participation. That is the essence of confidence, not loud declarations, but the quiet certainty that you are indispensable. When Donald Trump entered office, one of his most recognizable tools of foreign policy was tariffs. He believed economic pressure could achieve what negotiations often failed to deliver. The idea was simple: use America's market power as leverage. If a country wanted access to US consumers, it had to play by Trump's rules. This approach, which he called reciprocal trade, was designed to punish what he saw as unfair advantages enjoyed by America's partners and competitors alike. But while it resonated with parts of his domestic audience, globally it sparked resistance, and India became one of the nations that refused to be cornered. Tariffs were meant to send a message: comply or face economic pain. In some cases, they worked in extracting minor concessions, but with India, the effect was different. The United States imposed duties on Indian goods, believing New Delhi would fall in line. Instead, India responded by increasing tariffs on American products and diversifying its trade relationships, particularly by deepening ties with Russia and other partners. What Trump viewed as a strong-arm tactic, India interpreted as an opportunity to showcase independence. Rather than buckle, it leaned into self-reliance and new alliances. The difficulty with tariff diplomacy is that it assumes the other side is too dependent to push back. That assumption does not hold when the other side has a massive domestic market, a growing economy, and multiple trade partners. India fit that description perfectly. While some sectors felt the pinch, the overall message from New Delhi was unmistakable. America's threats no longer dictated India's choices. This was not the submissive response that Washington might have expected 2 decades earlier. Instead, it was a sign of shifting power, the kind of reaction that revealed how much the world had changed. Trump's use of tariffs also carried symbolic weight. It suggested that America was willing to weaponize its economy not just against rivals, but against friends. For India, this blurred the line between partnership and confrontation. The fallout was not just economic but psychological, strengthening India's resolve to avoid overdependence on any one power. In the process, Trump's strategy unintentionally boosted India's confidence to stand tall. What was meant to pressure India ended up reinforcing its role as a nation that could no longer be dictated to, not even by Washington. Subrahmanyam Jaishankar has earned a reputation unlike any other diplomat of his generation. He is not the kind of foreign minister who hides behind rehearsed statements or shies away from difficult questions. Instead, he has become known for his razor-sharp replies, his calm delivery, and his ability to turn pressure into an opportunity to project strength. His reputation is built not just on what he says, but on how he says it, measured, deliberate, and with an authority that leaves little room for rebuttal. In an age when diplomacy often feels watered down by politeness, Jaishankar has brought back the art of blunt honesty. What makes his presence striking is the balance between intellect and firmness. With decades of experience in foreign service, including critical postings in Washington, Beijing, and Tokyo, he knows the playbook of global powers inside out. When confronted with questions designed to corner India, he does not retreat into vague promises. He flips the narrative. For example, when asked why India continues trade with certain nations despite Western disapproval, his response is simple and devastating. Every country looks after its own interests first, and India is no different. That kind of clarity cuts through hypocrisy, and it resonates with audiences who are tired of double standards. His reputation also extends beyond words. He represents a broader transformation in how India views itself. Earlier diplomats often played defense, carefully avoiding offense to stronger nations. Jaishankar, on the other hand, plays offense when necessary. He does not go looking for fights, but he never avoids one when India's interests are questioned. This reputation has made him a symbol of India's new confidence, a leader who embodies the idea that the country will not apologize for putting itself first. Globally, this has left both admirers and critics. Admirers see him as a truth-teller, someone unafraid to challenge the dominance of the West. Critics accuse him of being too blunt or too nationalistic. But even the critics admit one thing: his words cannot be ignored. When Jaishankar speaks, the world listens, and that in itself is a mark of power. His reputation has become so strong that even the sharpest remarks, often interpreted as putting world leaders in their place, are not dismissed as rudeness, but recognized as the voice of a nation that knows its worth. The geopolitical landscape today looks nothing like it did a few decades ago, and the shift is undeniable. For much of the 20th century, the United States and its Western allies dictated the terms of global politics. Nations outside that circle were expected to follow instructions, align their policies, and accept that power flowed from Washington, London, and Brussels. But the rise of countries like India has disrupted that order. What we are witnessing now is not just a redistribution of economic weight, but a fundamental shift in who gets to set the rules. India's role in this shift is central. With its vast population, rapid economic growth, and strategic location, it has positioned itself as more than just a regional player. It is now a voice in global decision-making that cannot be ignored. On issues ranging from climate change to trade routes and technology, India's participation is no longer optional. It is necessary. This reality has changed the way world powers interact with New Delhi. What once might have been framed as requests now sound more like negotiations, and in some cases, desperate attempts to secure India's alignment. For the United States, this shift has been especially jarring. For decades, Washington assumed it could shape outcomes across Asia with relative ease. That assumption no longer holds. India does not always align with American strategies, whether it's on energy imports, defense partnerships, or its stance toward Russia and China. Instead of automatically falling in line, India makes choices based on its own interests. This has introduced a new dynamic. The West is no longer the only pole of influence. The power shift also extends to how narratives are controlled. In the past, Western media and policymakers shaped global perceptions of emerging nations. Now, leaders like Jaishankar and others have platforms to push back directly, dismantling outdated stereotypes in real time. This rhetorical independence reinforces the larger geopolitical transformation. It signals that emerging powers are not only growing economically, but also confident enough to challenge the authority of those who once dominated the conversation. This is why moments where India openly resists US pressure carry so much weight. They symbolize more than a single disagreement. They reveal a deeper truth. The age of unipolar dominance is over. The world is now multipolar, and India is no longer on the sidelines. It is at the center of the new order. What truly unsettles the United States in moments like these is not the words themselves, but the fact that they are spoken so unapologetically. For decades, Washington was used to compliance, to nodding partners, to countries hesitating before saying no. That hesitation gave the US a sense of control, a belief that it could steer global outcomes without serious resistance. When India, through Jaishankar, responds with sharp, unapologetic clarity, the shock comes from the removal of that hesitation. America is confronted not with defiance wrapped in anger, but with calm confidence that makes the rejection even harder to dismiss. The US is not accustomed to being treated as just another power at the table. Its leaders expect deference, at least in tone, if not in substance. But when India says, without blinking, that it will buy oil from where it chooses, trade with whom it wants, and decide its own policies without asking permission, it rattles Washington. The message is not that America is irrelevant, but that America no longer has the automatic authority it once enjoyed. That realization is what leaves the US speechless, not the rhetoric, but the recognition of diminished leverage. This shock factor is magnified by who delivers the message. Jaishankar is not a populist politician speaking to a domestic audience. He is a seasoned diplomat, someone who knows the weight of every word he speaks. When he stands firm against American questioning, the world pays attention. For US officials, this creates an uncomfortable contrast. A nation they once expected to persuade with pressure is now able to push back on equal footing and do so with language that resonates globally. The shock is not private. It plays out on the international stage, where audiences cheer India's composure and question America's fading dominance. The speechlessness also comes from the broader symbolism. If India can resist, others might follow. If India can stand its ground, why not other emerging powers? Washington recognizes this ripple effect. Every time New Delhi says no, it signals to the rest of the world that the unipolar order is gone for good. That, more than any phrase or soundbite, is what humbles America, the realization that it is no longer speaking from a position of unquestioned authority. The stage has changed, and India is no longer taking cues, it is giving them. So let's be clear, what we are witnessing is not a petty war of words, not a one-off exchange, but a turning point in how the world works. For years, America relied on pressure, on tariffs, on the illusion that it alone could dictate the rules. But India, through Jaishankar's voice, has shown that era is over. The phrase that captured attention, "Sit down, boy," was never about insult. It was about reality. A reality where India no longer seeks approval, no longer bends under threats, no longer waits for validation. And that is what left America stunned. Because when a nation as powerful, as influential, as historically dominant as the United States is forced to pause and recognize another country as an equal, it signals more than a diplomatic clash. It signals the arrival of a new world order. India's confidence is not bluster, it is backed by growth, by strategy, by resilience. Jaishankar's reputation is not built on provocation, but on precision. The shock to the US is not that India disagreed, it is that India disagreed without fear. This is why the moment matters. It tells every nation watching that power has shifted, that the future is not about one voice giving orders and the rest nodding along. It is about multiple voices, strong, unapologetic, shaping the agenda together. And whether Washington likes it or not, India is now one of those voices. That is the truth behind the drama. That is why the world listened.